Single dad gets trapped in elevator with a cold stranger. He didn't know she was the company's CEO. Do you always fix things that aren't yours, or is today just special? Luke Harrison looked up from the fuse box, one eyebrow arched, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Do you always start conversations with attitude, or is today just lucky for me? The woman, standing a few feet away, didn't smile. In fact, she looked as if smiling was a language she didn't speak. Dressed in a dark cashmere coat, high-heeled boots, barely scuffed, and a silk scarf that probably cost more than Luke's monthly rent, she didn't belong here, certainly not in a building like this, and definitely not stuck in a service elevator with him. "Look," she snapped, glancing at her watch for the third time. "In under a minute I have somewhere to be." "I'd guess that," Luke said, straightening slowly and wiping his hands on the back of his faded work pants. "But unless your watch doubles as a crowbar, I'm afraid you're stuck with me until this thing decides it's had enough fun." She sighed, crossed her arms, and leaned against the mirrored wall. The elevator groaned faintly beneath them. Luke noticed her flinch. "Don't worry," he said, voice low. "These things make noise when they're bored, not when they're dangerous." "Comforting," she muttered, not sounding comforted. Silence followed. Awkward, dense, the kind that presses in when two people from entirely different worlds are forced into the same cramped space with nothing to do but breathe the same stale air. "You live here?" she finally asked, not looking at him. "Nope." "I clean here, nights and weekends." He paused. "And sometimes when the elevator gets cranky, I fix stuff too." Still no smile. Just a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth that might have been interest or mild indigestion. I'm just here temporarily," she replied. That explained nothing, but Luke didn't push. "Name's Luke," he said instead. She hesitated. Valerie. It was a lie. He could tell. But again, he didn't push. "Ever notice how elevators never break when you're alone?" he asked, trying to diffuse the tension. "No," she replied coolly, "because I don't usually take elevators with strangers." Luke chuckled. "Life's full of firsts." Valerie looked at him, then really looked. Not the kind of glance one gives to a janitor or a passing stranger on the street. For a moment her eyes softened like she'd remembered something long buried. Then the lights flickered, and the elevator gave a sudden shuddering jolt. Valerie's hand shot out, gripping the rail. Luke's instinct kicked in. He moved without thinking and steadied her by the elbow. "I said it was cranky," he said quietly. She didn't move away right away. Then, as if realizing how close they were, she pulled back. "How long is this going to take?" Luke exhaled, crouching to inspect the panel again. "Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. Depends on whether this building still believes in miracles. You're not inspiring confidence." "I'm not here to inspire. I'm just here to keep the lights on and the roof from caving in." Valerie tilted her head. "Do you always talk in riddles? Only when I'm trapped with strangers who don't smile." That earned him a brief, involuntary huff of a laugh. Blink, and you'd miss it, but he didn't. "Don't get used to it," she said. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small paper-wrapped object. She frowned. "Is that granola bar? My daughter insists I carry one." "In case of elevator emergencies," she says. He extended it toward her. Valerie looked at it like it was a loaded weapon. "I'm not hungry, neither was I. Still, here we are." She took it reluctantly. Her fingers brushed his just to graze, and she pulled away as if stung. More silence. Then, "You said you have a daughter, Emily, 7. Smart, loud, loves drawing elephants." Valerie turned the wrapper in her hand. "She sounds joyful." "She is. Keeps me from turning into someone I don't want to be." And her mom. Luke paused. His face didn't change much, but his eyes went somewhere else for a beat. Somewhere far and quiet. Gone. 3 years now. "I'm sorry. Thanks." A long moment passed. The hum of the elevator felt louder now. "You know," she said, her voice suddenly softer. Most people would have panicked by now. Luke glanced up at her. Yeah, well, life teaches you that panic doesn't fix anything, especially when you've got a kid depending on you. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. And for a flicker of a moment, the woman in front of him seemed less polished, less untouchable, just a human being who had also been cornered by life once or twice. Suddenly, the elevator jerked upward, lights blinking back to full strength. Luke grinned. Looks like the building found its miracle. Valerie blinked. That actually worked. Luke shrugged. Sometimes all it takes is being stuck long enough for something to shift. The elevator dinged the doors, sliding open with a soft sigh. Valerie stepped out first, but then paused. Thank you for the granola bar and the quiet. He nodded, eyes warm. Anytime, Valerie. She turned and then stopped. My name's not Valerie, she said without looking back, but I'm not ready to tell you the real one yet. Then she walked away, and Luke stood there in the center of an elevator that had just started moving again, realizing something far more unexpected had just begun. Daddy, is it okay to give someone a drawing if you don't know their favorite color? Luke glanced up from the chipped kitchen counter where he was peeling an overripe banana into a lunchbox. Emily sat at the table, tongue poking out slightly as she shaded in the ears of a wobbly cartoon elephant on purple construction paper. That depends, Luke said. Are you giving it because you want them to like you or because you want them to smile? Emily paused, thoughtful. I think just to make them smile. Then color it however you like, kiddo. That's more than enough. She beamed, folded the drawing in half like a treasure map, and slid it carefully into her backpack. Luke returned to the banana with a small smile. He liked mornings like this, quiet, soft, simple. But simplicity didn't keep the lights on. And as the radiator clanged to life with a cough of steam, reality tapped him gently on the shoulder. Rent was due last week. The final notice was taped to the fridge right under Emily's macaroni art. As he zipped up her coat and walked her downstairs, Luke's mind drifted toward numbers. His day job barely covered groceries. The night shift as janitor helped, but barely. The freelance repair gigs inconsistent at best. Something had to give soon. Outside, the December air bit against his neck. Emily skipped beside him, humming a song she made up on the spot. They reached the building lobby when a voice stopped them. You dropped this. Luke turned. The woman from the elevator, Valerie, stood there holding Emily's wool mitten. Her expression was as unreadable as yesterday, but she wore a different coat and no makeup. She looked human. Less Wall Street, more Brooklyn Street corner. Emily lit up. It's you. The elevator lady. Valerie blinked, caught off guard. Emily tugged at Luke's sleeve. Can I give her the drawing now? Sure, Luke said gently and watched as his daughter unzipped her bag with care. This is for you, she said, holding up the folded drawing like an offering. Because you looked sad yesterday. Valerie took it slowly, almost suspiciously. She unfolded the paper. A wide purple elephant with sparkles and a lopsided smile stared back. I didn't have your favorite color, Emily added quickly, so I made up one just for you. Valerie stared at the drawing for a long time. And something maybe very small, maybe very old, shifted in her face. A crack in porcelain. Thank you, she said softly. Emily grinned. Okay, bye. We're going to school now. Daddy says learning makes your brain do push-ups. Luke chuckled, gave Valerie a polite nod, and the two walked off down the street. But Valerie stood there longer than she meant to, holding the drawing like it was made of something far more fragile than paper. That evening, Luke returned from work with sore knees and a pizza box. He climbed the stairs slower than usual. His feet ached from 12 hours in steel-toed boots and the weight of bills that hadn't been paid. When he reached the third floor, someone was sitting outside apartment 3C. It was her. She stood up as he approached. I wasn't waiting for you, she said first. Luke smirked. I didn't say you were. She held up a small paper bag. This was left in your mailbox downstairs. It was half stuck. I thought it might get thrown away." "Thanks," he said, taking it. She didn't leave. Instead, she looked at his door, the paint peeling the handle loose, the 3C barely clinging to the wood. "I live just across the hall," she said. He raised a brow. "Fancy that. I moved in a week ago." "So you said. And yesterday was—" She hesitated. "I don't usually get stuck in elevators with anyone, especially not people who offer granola bars and life advice." Luke leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You didn't seem like someone who needed either." "That's the thing," she said quietly. "I didn't think I did either." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Can I ask something?" She nodded. "Why here?" He motioned around the hall, cracked plaster, buzzing hallway lights, the faint scent of mildew. "People like you usually have penthouses, or at least working elevators." She looked down. "Let's just say I needed to be somewhere people don't ask questions." Luke didn't press. He understood better than most that some stories weren't ready to be told. She shifted, suddenly awkward. "Anyway, I should—" A voice down the hall called Vivian. Luke turned. A man in a crisp coat approached. Business slick Bluetooth and ear eyes locked on the woman beside him. "Meeting's in 20. I've got the car downstairs." Luke's eyes flicked back to her. Vivian. So Valerie was never real. She looked like she might explain, but Luke held up a hand. "You don't owe me anything," he said, voice level. "No, but I might owe myself something." He gave a faint nod. "We all do." Vivian glanced at him one last time, and then she was gone, heels clicking down the hall like the ticking of a clock he hadn't known he was listening to. Later that night, Luke stood by the window while Emily slept, her drawings taped to the wall behind him like badges of hope. He looked across the hallway. The light under 3C's door was on. Not Valerie. Vivian. Still, he couldn't shake the way she'd looked at that drawing. Like it wasn't a child's scribble, but something precious. Maybe even something she didn't know she needed. He whispered to the night, not expecting an answer. Funny thing about broken elevators. Sometimes they bring you to places you didn't know you were headed. And across the hall, behind a door that no longer hid a name, a woman sat on her couch, staring at a purple elephant taped to her fridge, her first decoration in years. The power went out just after 9 p.m. It wasn't dramatic, no sparks, no thunderclap, just a sudden quiet retreat of electricity like the building had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. The radiator hissed once, then fell silent. The humming of the old fridge ceased. The only light came from the window where soft snow was beginning to fall in thick, unhurried flakes. Luke lit a candle from the drawer. Then another. The kitchen flickered to life in gentle amber. Daddy Emily's voice came from the hallway. "Why's it so dark? Looks like the power's gone out, Bug." Luke met her at the door, scooping her into his arms. "But hey, guess what?" "What that means?" "It's flashlight fort time." Emily gasped. "No way." "Yes way." He grinned, carrying her into the living room. They draped a sheet over 2 chairs, crawled underneath with a flashlight and a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Emily nestled in the cold, forgotten in the warmth of story and candlelight. But, just as Luke began the second chapter, there was a knock on the door. He frowned. It came again. Softer this time. Hesitant. He stood, brushing snow off his flannel shirt. How had it already gotten in? He opened the door. Vivian stood there. No makeup, no scarf, just a heavy gray sweater and jeans and a nervous look that didn't fit her at all. "The hallway lights are out," she said quietly, "and I think the heating's gone with it. My apartment feels like a freezer." Luke stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not." He nodded to Emily. "We're building a fortress. It's kind of a communal effort." Vivian looked down at the small face peeking from behind the sheet. Emily beamed. "You can help decorate it. I have stickers." Vivian smiled genuinely this time. "I'd be honored." Later, the three of them sat in the living room with blankets draped across their shoulders like mismatched royalty. "I never knew a blanket fort could feel like a palace," Vivian said softly. Luke poured hot water into 3 mismatched mugs, steeping the last of his peppermint tea. "It's not about the blanket," he replied. "It's about who's underneath it with you." Vivian looked at him for a long time, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. Emily sipped her tea with exaggerated care. "Do you have a family, Miss Vivian?" Vivian's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "I had one. Long ago." Luke watched her carefully. Emily nodded like a tiny sage. "Sometimes people go away. My mom did. But Daddy says love doesn't leave it, just changes clothes." Vivian's lips parted. Her voice caught. Then, "That's beautiful." Luke gave a small smile. "She's wise for 7. She's luminous," Vivian whispered. They sat in the quiet. Outside, the snow fell thicker now, dusting the windows like sugar. Inside, time seemed to pause just long enough to feel like something sacred had entered the room. Then Emily yawned, long and dramatic. "Someone's ready for bed," Luke said. "I don't want to miss the snow," she murmured sleepily, eyes fluttering. "You won't," he whispered, lifting her gently into his arms. As he carried her to her room, Vivian stood in the candlelit silence, staring at the living room walls. On them were crayon-drawn elephant stars and a slightly crooked rainbow labeled Hope in bold, childlike handwriting. When Luke returned, she was still staring. "You decorated with truth," she said. He looked puzzled. "Your walls," she clarified. "Most people hang up what they want others to see. You hang up what's real." Luke shrugged. "We don't have much, but we've got honesty. And love. Emily says those are the best decorations anyway." Vivian smiled. "She's not wrong." He hesitated. "Then you want to stay a while until the heat comes back." She blinked. "Stay. I have a sofa. It's lumpy, but honest," he said, echoing her words. Vivian exhaled slowly. "It's strange. I have hotel rooms waiting for me, houses with smart thermostats and silent fridges. But none of them feel like this." Luke didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She moved toward the sofa and sat. "Do you believe in starting over?" He leaned on the wall near the kitchen. "Only every day." Vivian looked at her hands. "When I was 8, I used to build forts with my nanny in the garden. My father said it was a waste of time, that I should be practicing piano or reading balance sheets. So one day he cut the bedsheets we used into shreds. Said he wanted to cut the nonsense." She looked up, eyes shining. "I haven't built a fort since." Luke was quiet a moment. Then, "You know what I think?" "What I think the bedsheet wasn't the real problem. It was the fact that you were happy inside something you made yourself, and he couldn't control that." Vivian stared at him. "Why do you say things like that?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Because I've had my own sheets cut." They didn't speak for a while. Just listened to the wind against the window and the sound of Emily's slow, peaceful breathing. Then Luke said almost to himself, "It's funny, isn't it? What is? How a broken elevator can sometimes lift people better than a working one ever could." Vivian let out a soft breath. "That might be the most beautiful thing I've heard in years." He smiled. "Well, I have good lighting tonight. Candlelight makes everyone sound wiser." She looked down at her mug. "Luke, yeah, thank you, not just for the tea. For what then? For letting me be someone else for a little while." Luke didn't respond with words. Instead, he walked over to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small flashlight. He handed it to her. "What's this for?" she asked. "In case the dark comes back." She looked at him again, but this time something was different. She wasn't looking at a janitor or a single dad. She was looking at someone steady, a lighthouse in a storm. Vivian took the flashlight gently, and in the flickering hush of that room between snow and silence, she realized she hadn't felt this safe in years. The snow had melted by morning, but the silence it left behind hadn't. Luke stood in the hallway with his toolbox in one hand, keyring in the other. The superintendent had called at 7:00 a.m. Sharp, a pipe burst in Unit 5B. Again. And again the building's official maintenance crew hadn't shown up. Luke filled the gaps. Like always. He liked it that way. Quiet labor, no spotlight, no recognition. Recognition in his experience often came with a bill he couldn't afford to pay. As he passed the third-floor landing, a door clicked open behind him. Vivian stepped out, coffee mug in hand. Her hair was still damp, curling softly at the ends. No makeup, no walls. "Early bird," she said. Luke turned, offered a tired smile. Pipe on 5B decided it wanted to become a fountain. She tilted her head. "You're not the official guy, are you?" "No, just the unofficial everything." He started up the stairs, but she called after him. "Hey, about last night." Luke paused. "I haven't felt that kind of quiet in a long time," she said. "The kind that doesn't ask anything from you." Luke nodded. "Sometimes silence says the most." She smiled. "You should put that on a t-shirt." He turned to go, but not before adding, "Save some coffee for the rest of us." By mid-afternoon, Luke was back downstairs, shirt damp with pipe water and patience drained. Emily had the day off school, a teacher training day, and was quietly sketching on the floor with a pack of half-broken crayons. "I drew you a bear today," she said, "because you were grumpy this morning." Luke chuckled. "Grumpy bear, huh?" "What's he holding?" She pointed. "That's a wrench. He's fixing the sky." Luke looked at the drawing longer than he needed to. "Thanks, Em. I think I needed that more than I thought." Just then, a knock at the door. He opened it, expecting a neighbor. Instead, a man in a tailored wool coat stood there with the kind of practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Vivian Cole," the man said crisply. "I was told she recently relocated to this building." Luke stiffened just slightly. "And you are Robert Lang, Executive Vice President, Cole Systems." Sorry, wrong door," Luke said flatly, beginning to close it. Before he could, Vivian's voice echoed from the hallway. "Robert." The man turned. "There you are. Thank God." Vivian approached, calm but tight. Luke saw it, the small tremor in her wrist, the slight tension behind her eyes. She was wearing armor again, invisible but heavy. "I didn't ask to be found," she said. "You're needed at headquarters. The press is all over the failed merger story. Board wants to know where you stand." Vivian shook her head. "I took a leave of absence. You can't just vanish, Viv. You're not an intern. You're the face of Cole Systems." She exhaled slowly. "And what if I don't want to be?" Robert blinked. "What are you saying? I'm saying I need space, and you need to leave." He scoffed. "You think hiding in a building with cracked walls and busted plumbing makes you invisible?" Vivian didn't answer. Robert's eyes flicked to Luke. "So this is why you're here. Playing house with the handyman." Luke stepped forward, not aggressive, but firm. "She's not hiding," he said. "She's healing. There's a difference." Robert sneered. "Right. Must be nice rebuilding your soul with someone else's broken toolbox." Vivian's voice was cold now. "Leave. Now." Robert opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. "You'll regret this," he said, and walked away. Vivian stood frozen for a moment, then turned to Luke. "I'm sorry," she said. "He wasn't supposed to know." Luke leaned on the doorframe. "I'm not judging. We all have ghosts. Some just wear nicer suits." Vivian looked at him, and something in her broke not violently but quietly. The way ice cracks under the weight of memory. "You should know something," she said. Luke waited. "I didn't come here just to escape headlines. I came here because I needed to remember who I was before people decided who I should be." Luke said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only answer deep enough. That night, Luke sat with Emily as she fell asleep, her small hand resting on his chest. Outside, snow flurried again, light as dust. He tiptoed into the living room, poured himself a cup of tea, and stared at the wall where Emily's elephant drawing used to be. It was gone. In its place was a small folded note taped neatly. He opened it. It wasn't from Emily. It was from Vivian. I lied to you once, about my name, about who I was, but the truth is I've never been more myself than when I was sitting in that blanket fort. Thank you for letting me be nobody for a little while. You have no idea how much that meant. Luke folded the note slowly, holding it for a second before placing it next to Emily's drawing in the drawer marked Keep Forever. He looked out the window. Across the hall, light glowed from behind Vivian's door. He whispered to himself, a half-smile on his face. Funny thing about names? Sometimes you have to lose yours to find out who you really are. And across that thin hallway, across two lives that once ran in parallel, something unseen but powerful began to bend their paths together. Not with noise, not with fanfare, but with one handwritten note, a child's drawing, and a silence that finally felt full. Vivian hadn't cried in years. Not when the merger collapsed. Not when her mother stopped returning calls. Not even when she watched her name trend for 3 days straight beside the word cold-hearted. But tonight, a 7-year-old broke the dam with a letter in crayon. She'd found it tucked under her front door, slipped through like a secret. Folded in half edges uneven, written on a piece of sky-blue construction paper. Emily's handwriting was crooked and sweet, the L in love, taller than the rest of the word. Dear Miss Vivian, you don't have to smile if you don't want to, but if your heart is tired, mine is strong enough to share. Love, Emily. Vivian stared at it in the half-light of her apartment, everything around her suddenly too quiet. She sat down, no ceremony, no grace, just collapsed onto the floor like someone had cut her strings. Your heart is tired, mine is strong enough to share. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't corporate, but it was pure. And it was enough. The next morning, Luke found her standing outside their door at 7:15 a.m., holding a thermos of hot chocolate and a folded napkin with a muffin inside. Emily blinked, still in her fuzzy pajamas. You're early. We don't wake up till Daddy turns on the radio. Vivian offered the thermos. Peace offering. Emily squinted suspiciously, then took a sip. It's real cocoa. Not that powdered kind. Luke appeared behind her shirt, wrinkled hair tousled. What's going on? Vivian held out the napkin. Blueberry. Bought it, didn't bake it. Just in case you're wondering. Luke looked from her to Emily. Everything okay? Vivian nodded. Just wanted to say thank you. For the letter. Emily tilted her head. Do you feel less tired now? Vivian knelt to eye level. You have no idea. That afternoon, the neighborhood hosted its annual winter block party. Snowflakes fell like powdered sugar over folding tables lined with plastic cups and slow cookers. Luke stood by a battered propane heater, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, watching Emily negotiate a cookie swap like a seasoned diplomat. Vivian appeared beside him. She didn't speak right away. When she finally did, her voice was low. I told my assistant to clear my schedule for 2 weeks. Luke raised an eyebrow. Big move for a CEO. She smiled faintly. Feels smaller now. Like finally making room to breathe. He nodded. Breathing's underrated. There was a pause. Then she asked, Can I tell you something? Luke turned toward her, sensing the weight behind her tone. When I was 16, I wrote a letter to my father. Told him I didn't want to take over the company. That I wanted to study marine biology. She laughed softly. He called me ridiculous. Said I was wasting my bloodline. Luke stayed quiet. Vivian continued. He made me read my resignation letter to the board 2 years later, then shredded it in front of me and said, Now you've had your rebellion. Go build your legacy. Luke's jaw clenched. And you did. I did, she said. But I lost my name in the process. My joy. My Oxygen. She looked over at Emily chasing snowflakes with a paper cup. Your daughter gave me some back. Luke's voice was gentle. She's good at that. She tends to people like their gardens, even ones they gave up watering. Vivian looked at him. Do you believe people can change? I believe people don't change overnight, but they can choose differently one choice at a time. And do you think I could be someone different? Luke met her gaze. I think you already are. She held his eyes. No games, no armor, just two people standing in the snow watching a child remind them how to be human again. That night, Emily was fast asleep under a mountain of blankets, cheeks pink from the cold. Luke stood at the sink rinsing mugs when a knock came at the door. He dried his hands, opened it. Vivian was there holding a folder. I want to show you something, she said. He stepped aside. She walked in, sat at the table, and opened the folder. Inside was a proposal, a software concept. Smart, intuitive. A platform designed to streamline access to health care and benefits for blue-collar families, those living paycheck to paycheck like Luke. He froze. This is your blueprint, she said. Your notes, your handwriting. Luke's voice was barely above a whisper. Where did you get this? I found it in your file drawer when I was looking for Emily's drawings. I didn't mean to pry, but… Luke, this could change lives. He stared at her. That was from a long time ago. Before… everything. Vivian closed the folder gently. You still carry it. Luke exhaled slowly. I stopped believing anyone would care. Or listen. I'm listening now, she said, and I want to help. He looked at her. Really looked and saw not the CEO, not the stranger in the elevator, but a woman offering him a chance not just to be seen, but to be believed. I don't need credit, he said. Vivian leaned in. It's not about credit, Luke. It's about purpose. You built something beautiful. Let's bring it to life. His throat tightened. What if it fails? Vivian didn't blink. Then we fail, trying to do something that matters. And that's a win in my book. Silence. Then Luke reached for the folder, and just like that, something long dormant inside him, something quiet and brave, flickered back to life. You know what the difference is between a blueprint and a dream. Vivian asked the question quietly, the way someone asks about an old scar. Luke didn't look up from the circuit board he was tinkering with on the kitchen table. What one you can fold up and forget in a drawer. The other keeps waking you up at 3 a.m. He tightened a screw, then finally met her eyes. And what happens when the dream is what you've been trying to forget? Vivian's lips parted, then closed again. She didn't have an answer. Outside the window, the city moved in hushed rhythm, snowplows groaning down dim streets, headlights sliding across brick walls, and behind it all the soft hum of a world that never really sleeps. The small apartment was quiet except for the whir of Luke's soldering iron and Emily's gentle breathing from the other room. They'd been working like this for nearly a week, late nights bent over wires, napkins full of note sketch pads layered in scribbles and systems. Luke's prototype, the one he had buried after his wife died, was slowly coming back to life. And with it, so was he. Vivian had offered more than funding. She brought insight vision connections. But she also brought something Luke hadn't expected: belief. Not the corporate ROI-driven kind, but the kind that says, I see you. I know this matters to you. And because of that, it matters to me too. I looked you up, Vivian said softly, breaking the silence. Luke set the tool down, wiping his hands. So you were good. Before you left the industry, you had people lining up for your work. Luke gave a dry laugh, and then I lined up outside a hospital billing office with a folder full of denial letters. Vivian's voice was almost a whisper. I'm sorry. Luke turned toward her. You ever watch someone you love waste away not because medicine doesn't exist, but because someone behind a desk decided they didn't check the right box? Her silence answered for her. That's when I stopped believing in systems, he said. so I tried building something for people who never even got a seat at the table." Vivian nodded slowly. "But when you lost her, I lost the will to fight." She looked at him, not with pity but with something deeper. Recognition. "I know that feeling," she said. "I didn't lose someone, but I lost myself. Somewhere between board meetings and bottom lines, I became a version of myself I didn't even recognize." Luke held her gaze. "So why now? Why come back to this?" Vivian didn't blink, because when Emily handed me that drawing, she said something inside me whispered, "Remember who you were before they told you who to be." Luke leaned back in his chair. "You think this system we're building can actually do that for others? I think it's not just a product," she said. "It's a mirror. And the right mirror can change everything." A few days later, Vivian invited Luke to a quiet cafe on the Upper West Side, the kind of place with soft jazz in the background and waiters who didn't rush you. She'd arranged a small meeting with a few trusted people from the philanthropic arm of her company. No press, no fanfare, just minds open to something real. Luke arrived in a jacket too thin for the cold, but his eyes were steady and his back was straight. Vivian introduced him as the architect of a quiet revolution. Luke blinked at that, but didn't argue. He opened his folder, laid out the plans, and spoke in the only language he knew: honesty. He talked about single moms choosing between medicine and rent, about veterans lost in paperwork, about janitors like him whose families deserved dignity without drowning in bureaucracy. He didn't pitch, he shared. And when he finished, the room was silent in the best way, the kind of silence that settles in when something undeniable has been spoken. One of the board members leaned in and said, "I haven't felt this in a long time." Vivian smiled gently. "That's because this wasn't a meeting. It was a beginning." That evening, back at the apartment, Emily danced in mismatched socks across the living room. "I drew a new logo for your project," she announced proudly, holding up a page. A stick figure with a superhero cape stood beside a laptop with a heart on it. "It's called Dad's Heart Net," she beamed, "because your heart's in it, and it helps people." Luke laughed that rare full laugh that shook his chest. "We may need to workshop the name Kiddo." Vivian took the drawing. "Or maybe we don't." Luke looked at her. "You think the world's ready for this?" She looked back. "I don't think the world is ever ready for change, but that's never stopped it from happening." He leaned against the wall, watching her. "You've changed." Vivian smiled, but there was something vulnerable in it. "No, I think I've just come home to the person I was supposed to be." She walked closer, stopping just a foot away. "You know what's funny?" she said softly. "When I first met you, I thought you were stuck. A man who never climbed out." Luke tilted his head. "And now I see you weren't stuck at all." Her voice dipped. "You were anchored to something real. And I was the one floating." There was a moment, just silence between them, breath and understanding. Then Luke whispered, "Maybe we're both learning to breathe again." Vivian's eyes shimmered. Maybe we're not so different after all. And in the gentle hush of that small apartment surrounded by crayon dreams and broken things made whole again, two people realized something neither had dared to hope for. They were no longer walking alone. Why would someone try to ruin something that helps people? Emily's voice broke the silence as she swirled her spoon through a bowl of alphabet soup, oblivious to how heavy her question hung in the air. Luke didn't answer right away. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table, one hand on a manila folder, the other clenched slightly around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Vivian looked up from the couch where her laptop sat open, but ignored. Her expression was unreadable too, practiced, too polished, but her eyes told another story. Behind the steel was something burning. Luke finally spoke, his voice low. Because not everyone wins when people stop struggling. It started 3 days earlier. The platform, now unofficially dubbed Hopewell, had entered private testing. A small pilot group of families and social workers had begun exploring the interface. Feedback was better than expected. People cried on Zoom calls. One woman in Detroit said it helped her find benefits she'd been denied for 3 years. Another man called it a compass for those of us who got lost in the paperwork. But good news travels slow. Sabotage doesn't. That morning, Vivian received a call from her assistant, trembling voice near tears. Vivian. Someone leaked the prototype. What she'd said sharply pulse-dropping. It's all over an anonymous tech forum. The source code, screenshots, even internal documentation. Vivian felt cold, not the kind from weather, but the kind that starts in your spine and spreads like ink. How? There was a pause. Someone from inside the Cole Systems development server. The access trace points back to Derek Lang. Vivian didn't need time to process. Of course it was Derek, executive VP, her father's protege, and the man who'd made it his mission to keep her in line or out of the picture entirely. Luke, upon hearing the news, had only said one thing. So we build it again. Better. Together. But Vivian knew the deeper danger wasn't in the leak, it was in what would come next. And she was right. By the afternoon, 3 board members had called. By evening, 2 investor meetings had been canceled. And by the following morning, a headline on a major business news site read, "Is Cole Systems Golden Girl sabotaging her own company for a pet project?" Vivian sat on the edge of the sofa, fingers tight around her phone. Emily was in her room coloring. Luke paced the living room, trying not to let the weight of her silence fill the space. "I can handle a headline," he finally said. "I can handle the leak, but I can't handle watching you get buried for trying to do the right thing." Vivian looked up, voice steady but hoarse. "You think this is the first time someone tried to bury me?" "No," he said, "but I want it to be the last." She smiled faintly. "I spent years being the daughter they paraded around in front of cameras while men like Derek made the real decisions. When I finally stood up and said no, they smiled and waited. Waited for me to stumble." Luke stepped closer. "Then let them see you stand." Vivian met his gaze. "They won't come after me directly. They'll come after you. This was your idea. Your code. Your name will be the one dragged." Luke's voice was soft, unshaken. "I've lived most of my life in the shadows. If I have to take a bullet for something that matters, then at least this time, it won't be for nothing." Her throat caught. She whispered, "You're not just building something to help others. You're teaching me how to be brave without being cold." He stepped even closer. "And you're teaching me how to hope again without feeling foolish." Then, quietly, Vivian opened her laptop. "I have one shot to shift the story," she said. "The annual investor forum is tomorrow. Derek will be there. The board, the press. It's the one place I can speak without them cutting my mic." Luke frowned. "You're going public." She nodded. "I'm going to show them what Hopewell really is. Not in code. In impact. And if they vote you out..." Vivian smiled faintly. "Then I walk out holding something they can't buy back." Luke reached for her hand. "Then I'll be there. Not in the back. Not in the shadows. Right beside you." She squeezed his fingers. "You always know the right thing to say." "I've been practicing," he murmured, "every time you leave the room." The next day, the investor forum buzzed with camera flashes and curated charm. Vivian stepped onto the stage in a simple charcoal blazer, no jewelry, no fanfare. Behind her a screen. On it, faces. Dozens of them. A single mom in Alabama. A retired vet in Montana. A bakery worker in Queens. Each one holding up a handwritten sign Hopewell helped me find help. I wasn't invisible anymore. Finally, a system that sees me. Vivian took a breath, then spoke not from a teleprompter but from her soul. "I stand here not as a CEO but as someone who forgot what it meant to care beyond quarterly growth. I was taught that impact was something you measure in numbers, but I've learned that real impact is measured in faces, in dignity restored." She paused. The man who built this, the man they want to erase, is a single father who once gave up on the system because the system gave up on him. But he didn't stay down. He rebuilt it, and I had the privilege to help him carry it into the light. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the crowd, Derek Lang stood frozen, and Vivian looked directly at him. "You want a scandal," she said. "Here it is. We chose kindness over profit. And I do it again." The room was silent. Then slowly someone began to clap. Then another, and another, until the room stood not for numbers but for meaning. Back at the apartment, Luke tucked Emily into bed. She held his hand a little tighter than usual. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug you and Miss Vivian. Are you heroes now?" Luke smiled. "No," he said softly, "but we're finally doing something worth being remembered for." And somewhere in the city, in the heart of a system that had long forgotten how to feel a seed of change, was quietly blooming. It happened on a Wednesday. No warning. Just a cold email with the subject line "Reorganization Plan. Immediate Implementation." By noon, the Halcyon Room's access cards were revoked. The project was suspended under internal restructuring. Legal had stepped in. The server was locked down. Chloe's badge flashed red at the scanner. Lynn's files disappeared mid-backup. Greg stared blankly at the frozen interface like it had betrayed him. And Luke wasn't even told. He found out when his name vanished from the internal directory. Vivian stormed into the downtown office tower at 4:13 p.m., her heels echoing like a countdown. She didn't speak to the receptionist. She didn't wait for an elevator. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Her father was waiting for her in the boardroom. Gray suit, blue tie, calm smile. As always, a man who mistook control for morality. "I assume you've read the internal memo," he said. Vivian dropped a folder onto the glass table. "You shut down Hopewell without a vote." He clasped his hands. "We didn't shut it down. We're repositioning." The board agreed the project was a distraction. She leaned in. A distraction from actually helping people. Her father tilted his head, voice smooth. "This company doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on structure, shareholder value, legal risk assessments. And frankly, Vivian, you've blurred the line between heart and business one too many times." Vivian's knuckles whitened against the folder. You saw the response at the forum. The impact. People believe in this. He didn't blink. "You built momentum off pity. That's not sustainable." She stared at him like he'd spoken another language. "That wasn't pity," she said. "That was dignity rediscovered. That was purpose." Her father rose, slowly walked to the window. "Your mother once said you were too much fire for a house of glass. She was right. You keep throwing yourself at causes you can't control." Vivian's voice dropped. "Maybe the problem isn't the fire. Maybe it's that the house was always too fragile to hold a real soul." He turned, cold, final. "You've made your choice, Viv. So have we." That night, Luke sat at the small kitchen table staring at the login screen. Access denied. He closed the laptop, leaned back in the chair. The apartment was dark save for the dim glow of the stove light. Emily had fallen asleep early, curled under 2 blankets with her sock monkey hugged tight. He didn't say anything when Vivian walked in. She didn't need to explain. He could read the silence on her face like a headline. "They shut it down?" he asked. She nodded, setting her bag down slowly. "Everything." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I should have seen this coming." Vivian shook her head. "This isn't your fault." "They're right, though," he muttered. "I don't belong in that world. I never did. They were just looking for an excuse." Vivian walked over, knelt in front of him. "No," she said firm. "They weren't threatened by your flaws, Luke. They were threatened by your clarity. You built something real, something that made people feel seen. They don't know what to do with that." He looked at her, a flicker of something rising in his chest. Anger, disappointment, grief. "I spent years afraid to dream again," he said. And the one time I do—" Vivian placed a hand on his. "They can cut the wires, but they can't kill the current. You hear me?" He didn't answer, so she pressed softer now. "You told me once you stopped believing in systems. But this wasn't a system. This was you. What you carried. What you fought to build even when no one was looking." Luke looked down at their hands, then back up. And now, what Vivian stood slowly. "Now." "We get louder." The next morning, Luke opened his front door and found a package. No return address. Just his name in thick black marker, inside a flash drive. He plugged it into an offline laptop, breath tight in his chest. What loaded was shocking a full backup of Hopewell's architecture, design, back-end, every revision, every user interface note. A small post-it on the last file read, "Not everyone in the building forgot who they work for." "See." Luke called Vivian. She answered on the first ring. "We have the whole build," he said. "Someone copied it before they locked us out." Vivian didn't hesitate. "Then we finish what we started." He paused. "But how? No investors, no resources, no legal backing." Vivian's voice was calm, fierce. "We don't need a company. We need a community." 3 days later, in a dimly lit community center, they hosted the first Hopewell Underground session. 20 folding chairs, 2 borrowed projectors, free coffee in styrofoam cups, and over 40 people showed up. Single parents, veterans, teachers, a grandmother with a tablet held together by duct tape. Luke stood at the front, fingers fidgeting nervously. Vivian leaned over and whispered, "You don't need a podium. Just be you." He nodded. Then he stepped forward and spoke. This started with a drawing my daughter made, a heart inside a laptop. She said it was called Dad's HeartNet. I laughed. But the truth is, she was right. That's all we were trying to build, a network for hearts too tired to keep knocking on locked doors. He looked around the room. "You're not invisible. Not here. Not anymore." The applause was soft, but it was honest. And sometimes quiet hope is louder than any headline. Outside, the wind picked up sharp against the winter air. Vivian stood next to Luke, watching the group scatter into the night, hands full of guides, USBs, promises. Luke glanced sideways. "You still think we can win this?" Vivian smiled, eyes glistening. "I don't think we need to win. I think we just need to outlast the lie." He turned to her. "And what lie is that?" "That people like you don't matter." She reached into her pocket, pulled out the drawing Emily had made. The superhero, the laptop, the heart. Turns out, she said, your daughter wasn't wrong. And together, under a flickering streetlight with the world still trying to turn off the lights, they carried a spark. A small, defiant, stubborn spark. But enough to begin again. The snow came fast that night, sideways furious, a blinding wall of white against the city's glass and steel. Power lines trembled, streetlights blinked uncertainly, and in the cramped warmth of Luke's apartment, the glow from a single lantern lit their faces in gold. Emily sat wrapped in 2 blankets on the couch, nose red, sipping warm milk. Vivian stood by the window phone, pressed to her ear. The signal had dropped 3 times. The 4th time, she didn't bother trying again. Luke was kneeling in front of the small heater, adjusting the dial. The power outage had taken the heat with it, and even the radiator was groaning like it was ready to give up. "You ever feel like the universe is testing you?" Vivian asked. Luke didn't look up. "This isn't a test," he said. "It's a reveal. Storms don't break people, they show you what's already cracked." Vivian let that sink in, staring at him across the shadows. "What if I'm more cracked than I thought?" He finally turned, eyes steady. "Then you're human. And that's not a flaw, it's a place to begin." By midnight, most of the city had gone dark. No traffic, no trains. Just the muffled hush of a storm swallowing the skyline. Inside, Luke had turned the dining table into a makeshift workshop. The Hopewell prototype salvaged from the flash drive sat on his laptop, glowing softly like a pulse. Vivian stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, no makeup, no shield. I used to think control was the most important currency, she said. But sitting in the dark like this? I realize I never really had it. I just wore it like armor. Luke glanced at her. What changed? She exhaled. You. Emily. This. She nodded to the screen. This isn't just software, it's a lighthouse. Luke smiled faintly. It's not finished. Vivian leaned closer. Neither are we. At 2:17 a.m., a knock came at the door. Luke froze. So did Vivian. No one should be out in this weather. He opened the door slowly. It was Chloe, wind-blown soaked, holding 2 thermoses and a backpack. I brought backup drives, she said through chattering teeth. And hot soup. Luke blinked. How did you? I walked. The subway's dead, but the fire in my chest fully operational. Vivian stepped forward, taking the bag from her. You didn't have to. I did, Chloe cut in. Because what you built changed my brother's life. He got approved for benefits last week. First time in 3 years. So, yeah, I had to. Luke stared at her, emotion thick in his chest. You just walked through a storm for us. Chloe shrugged. I wasn't walking toward you. I was walking toward what's right. The apartment buzzed with new energy. Chloe booted up her own laptop. Luke sketched out patches on paper napkins. Vivian brewed coffee on the emergency burner. Even Emily stayed awake for a while, curled up next to her dad, humming softly to herself. Then, a sudden knock, louder this time. Luke stood. Vivian put a hand on his arm. Be careful. He nodded, opened the door again. This time it wasn't Chloe. It was Derek, standing under an umbrella coat flecked with snow, wearing that smug grin that made Luke's hands curl. Vivian's face went hard. What are you doing here? Derek didn't flinch. We need to talk. Luke stepped forward. Unless you brought apology letters and a heater, we're good. Derek ignored him. The board didn't authorize what I did. Vivian, they're panicking. The investor pressure's mounting. Some are flipping. They want a way out. Vivian crossed her arms. And now you want my help cleaning it up? I want a partner, he said smoothly. Hopewell can still live, under new terms. We fold it back into coal systems. You get partial control, limited scope, no politics. Luke's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. You mean no power? You want the brand without the soul. Derek looked at him. You're a janitor. You built something incredible, but let's not pretend you know how to scale it. Luke didn't blink. I know how to build something that doesn't crush people under its own weight. That's more than you've ever done. Vivian stepped between them. You tried to kill this Derek, and you would have, if not for people like Luke, people who don't stop when it gets inconvenient. She held up the old crayon drawing Emily had made now, pinned to the wall above their whiteboard. See this, she said. That's our mission statement. It wasn't written by a lawyer. It was drawn by a child who still believes in good things. Derek opened his mouth. Vivian cut him off. You can leave now. And take your umbrella. We're not afraid of a little weather. Derek left. And with him, something else vanished, fear. Vivian turned to Luke, breath still catching. He stepped closer, voice low. You really told him off with a drawing. She smiled. Wasn't just a drawing. It was a North Star. He looked at her. What now? Vivian's answer was soft, steady. Now we go around them. Not through. Around. Luke nodded. They stood there just inches apart in a room dimly lit but fiercely alive. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the fire had never burned brighter. It started with a single click. Luke hadn't meant to send it. Not really. He had typed it during one of those long, aching nights, the kind where the city outside sounded too quiet and the past too loud. The letter was meant for no one. Or maybe for someone who no longer existed, the version of himself that used to believe life was fair, that effort would be enough. He'd left it sitting in drafts for 3 days. But then Emily had found it. She was tracing hearts in the condensation on the window when she turned and asked Daddy, Why do you have a letter that says, "I give up" in the title? Luke froze. He didn't realize she even knew how to read subject lines. "I didn't mean for you to see that bug." Emily looked at him, brow furrowed in that thoughtful way children sometimes wear, like they're trying to solve the entire world with just their eyes. "Did you give up?" Luke knelt down, swallowed the knot in his throat. "No," he whispered. "But I thought about it." She paused. Then softly, "Don't send it. Write a new one. One that ends better." And so he did. The next morning, Luke rewrote the letter. He didn't craft it for sympathy. He didn't try to sound noble. He simply told the truth. About how he once worked nights cleaning the very buildings where dreams were funded, and how it made him feel invisible. About how he buried a prototype next to a grave and told himself it was over. About how a stranger with a steel heart and hidden kindness helped him remember he still had something worth building. And at the end, he added just one line: "This isn't a success story. Yet. But maybe if someone else reads this, they'll stop erasing themselves from their own life." He clicked post on a quiet blog Vivian had once set up for their project. And then he forgot about it. Until it didn't forget him. 12 hours later, the server crashed. By morning, the letter had been shared over 500,000 times. By noon, journalists were calling. Requests for interviews flooded the Hopewell inbox. Someone printed it and taped it to the front doors of a community college in Ohio with the words, "Don't give up, you're not alone." A senator tweeted it with the caption, "Policy might take years, but stories can shift hearts overnight." At first, Luke didn't understand what was happening. Then Chloe burst into the apartment waving her phone. "You broke the internet, man." Vivian was right behind her, breathless. "It's everywhere. Every media outlet is picking it up. They're calling it the Janitor's Manifesto." Luke blinked. "I didn't even sign my name." Vivian smiled. "That's probably why it worked. You spoke for more people than you realize." That night, they were invited to speak on a live-stream panel hosted by a major national nonprofit. Luke wore the only blazer he owned. Vivian helped fix his collar, her fingers lingering just a second longer than needed. "Still think you're invisible?" she whispered. Luke chuckled nervously. "I feel like someone's going to show up and revoke all this any minute." She stepped back, looked him in the eyes. "They can't take away what you've earned. Not anymore." The panel began. The host introduced Luke as a father, a builder, a voice for the unheard. Luke tried to speak, but his voice caught. So he did what he always did. He told a story. About his wife, about Emily's drawing. About failure, not as an ending, but as a threshold. And he ended with this: "Hope isn't loud. It doesn't come crashing in. It starts quiet, like a hand on your back when you think you're alone. That's what we're trying to build. A system that remembers people, not just files them away." The chat exploded. Thousands watching. Thousands crying. Thousands remembering themselves in his words. Later that evening, the three of them, Luke, Vivian, and Emily, sat on the apartment floor surrounded by empty teacups and cooling pizza. Vivian leaned back against the couch, smiling softly. "You know, before all this, I thought impact had to be loud. Global. Measured in graphs." Luke raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She glanced at Emily, curled up between them, fast asleep. "Now I think impact looks like a kid drawing hope on a napkin, and a father brave enough to believe in it." Luke looked at her, longer this time, more open, more certain. "You changed, you know," he said. Vivian smiled but didn't deflect. "So did you." "No," he said. "I just remembered who I was before I started shrinking." A beat passed. Then Vivian whispered, "Then let's never shrink again." And in the quiet glow of a city rediscovering its soul through snowstorms, silence, and a single unsent letter, two people finally found what they'd both been building toward all along. Not just a platform, not just a future, but each other. A month had passed since the storm. The snow was softer now, no longer a threat, but a hush. Blanketing the city in white, it felt less like something to brace against and more like a quiet blessing. On this particular night, it fell gently outside a modest brick home in the suburbs, a place that didn't yet have a name on the mailbox but had already become a home. Inside, laughter stirred the air. Emily was helping set the table, her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth as she carefully aligned the silverware like they did in fancy restaurants. She wore a red sweater, 3 sizes too big, and socks that didn't match. She insisted it was fashion. Luke stood at the stove, stirring something rich and golden in a worn copper pot. The scent of rosemary and garlic floated through the kitchen, and Vivian, no longer a CEO but somehow more herself than ever, sat at the corner reading a picture book aloud, her voice low and warm. And the little star said even the smallest light can find its way through the dark. She read, glancing up at Emily, who beamed. This wasn't a palace, or a penthouse, or a boardroom bathed in glass and power. It was better, because it was theirs. A house with 1 working heater, a fireplace they weren't sure how to use yet, and a living room full of blankets and second-hand pillows. The foundation wasn't built from concrete and steel, but from rebuilding, from nights sitting on the floor drafting code, from mornings fixing school lunches and fixing the world in equal measure. They had launched Hopewell 2.0 just 2 weeks earlier now, fully independent, funded not by venture capital, but by donors, teachers, nurses, and bus drivers who believed in the mission. Over 500,000 users in the first week. And every story that came in, every thank you message, every photo of a family reunited, a caseworker finally able to help, felt like a small lantern lit in a world too long dimmed. Dinner was slow. No one was in a rush. For once, time was not the enemy. "Do you think Mom would have liked this stew?" Emily asked between bites. Luke smiled, soft and sad all at once. She would have said it needed more salt, but then eaten 3 bowls. Vivian reached over and gently placed her hand on his. There were still silences sometimes, but they no longer hurt. They simply made room. Later, after dishes were stacked and leftovers packed, Emily pulled a small wooden box from under the couch. "I made something," she said, grinning. She placed the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a carved sign painted in soft blue and white. A little crooked, a little uneven, but perfect. "Welcome to HeartNet House." Vivian blinked. "You named the house," Emily nodded proudly. "It's where all the hearts live now." Luke looked at her, then at the sign, and something in his chest tightened, the kind of tight that only comes when you realize you've somehow arrived, even though the map never made sense. He knelt beside her. "You know what kiddo she turned. This might be the most important thing anyone's ever built here." Emily giggled. "Even more important than the internet. Especially more important than the internet." That night, as the fire crackled low and the last embers of the day drifted into stillness, Luke stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The stars above were sharp and clear. Vivian joined him, slipping her hand into his coat pocket. "I used to think love was a weakness," she said. "Something that blurred your vision. Made you soft." Luke looked at her. And now Vivian smiled, gaze upward. "Now I think it's the only thing that made me see." A pause. Then she turned to him, eyes shining in the cold. "Do you remember what you said to me that night when everything was falling apart? I said a lot of things." She laughed. "No, the one that stuck. You said, 'We don't have to win. We just have to outlast the lie.'" Luke nodded. "Still believe it." "Well," she whispered, "we did. And then we built something in its place." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching their breath disappear into the night. And then Emily's voice floated from the doorway. "Daddy, you forgot the best part." They turned. She held up a worn paper, her original drawing. The superhero. The laptop. The heart. "I never finished it," she said shyly. "But I added this." She flipped it. A new figure had been sketched in crayon beside the hero, holding hands, smiling. "Vivian." "Now it's complete," Emily said. Luke looked at the drawing. then at the two girls who had unknowingly rebuilt his soul. He wrapped them both in his arms. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had finally come home. And in a quiet house with mismatched furniture and hearts bigger than its walls, Christmas arrived not with grand gestures or polished ornaments, but with laughter stew and a sign carved by a little girl who still believed in superheroes. Because in the end, the most extraordinary stories don't happen in boardrooms or battlefields. They happen at kitchen tables, around soup pots and open laptops, between people brave enough to believe again. And this story, this real story, didn't end on a screen or in a file. It lived on in every letter sent, every heart helped, every child who looked at the world and whispered, "What if we could fix it?" And someone who finally said back, "We can." If this story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists even in the quiet corners of everyday life, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country. In the comments, it means the world to know how far these stories are reaching. If you believe in stories that heal, stories that uplift and reconnect us to our shared humanity, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to come, and we'd be honored to share it with you. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. From our little storytelling corner to your heart, thank you for watching.